We're going to be talking about hospitality because this is our series of sermons, Christian and blank. Today is Christian and hospitality. If you ever go on a tour guide in the Hearst Castle in the mountains of California, they will talk about a millionaire who built this amazing castle, amazing place, and he would love to invite guests over. And these would be rich people, important people, artists, musicians, Hollywood stars, and they would enjoy their time there. But he had 3 requirements. You join him for lunch, dinner, and the movie afterwards, because this is where he gets all of his entertainment. And you actually had arranged seating, and you had a name, a tag with your name on it, and wherever the tag was, that's where you sit. So if you were interested, you would sit close to this person. His name is William. And if he got tired of you, your name tag would be placed at the end of the table. He invited people to entertain himself. And if you would be the one person that wanted to visit this wonderful place with lots of gardens, you would be out of luck because you're nobody, and you're not welcome there. In contrast, there was a famous Christian philosopher, a theologian, a missionary who moved to Switzerland from the United States. He bought a big property in the mountains. It was a house, the chalet type. And he opened his doors to everyone to come and live with his family. He had a family of 6. And he made accommodations for 25 more guests to live with him at any time. His goal was to create a place where people could find answers when they were seeking God or hard to answer philosophical questions. But it wasn't just about philosophy. L'Abri is what the place was called. The shelter was a place where people could experience radical hospitality. Francis and Edith, they welcomed people from all walks of life. There were students, travelers, atheists, doubters, seekers. And they provided food and shelter and a listening ear without being very judgmental. And you could actually donate to stay there. It didn't cost much. Many people that visited that place experienced the love of Christ that they felt through them. If you ever wanted to experience that kind of a place, it's still around because his legacy lives on. And there's a community of L'Abri houses. There's one in England, there's one in Australia, South Africa, Canada, and even here in the United States. You can spend only $20 to cover a portion of the cost and stay at a really big mansion, I would say, in England. It's a wonderful experience of hospitality. As a city sits on the hill visible to everyone, and a candle is shining to the people in the room, so are the Christians are called to be the light to the world. The church is to be an example to the world in all aspects of life, including hospitality. Especially, we're supposed to raise the bar very high when it comes to everything virtuous, including hospitality. We're going to look at some examples of hospitality in the Bible. And very early on, we see that God visits Abraham. He was sitting outside of his shelter, and he sees 3 strangers coming his way, and he bows down to them. He invites them over. He says, "I'm going to wash your feet. Please rest here under the tree." Who were these visitors that visited Abraham? We later learn in verse 13 and 20 that God was one of them, along with 2 angels. This was a manifestation of God, something tangible where you can actually touch and feel God. It's called theophany. Some theologians say this was actually Christ himself that came to Abraham, and we call this Christophany, the pre-incarnate Christ that appeared to Abraham, just like he appeared in the image of Melchizedek. Abraham shows him great hospitality. And someone might think, well, if God came over to my house, if Jesus came over, obviously I would accept him. But what's interesting is in the next chapter over, these same 2 angels come to Sodom and Gomorrah, and they visit Lot. Now, he didn't know that they were angels until later on. He sees them as strangers, and what a dangerous place to accept strangers into your house when you're living in a city, a corrupt city like that. Yet he shows them incredible hospitality, and later finds out that they were angels who saved his life. You know, dwellers of those ancient places were very, very hospitable. One of those groups is called the Bedouins. They're the people that live in shelters, and for them, hospitality is sacred. Hospitality in those regions actually is a matter of life and death in those hard conditions. So you really appreciate when people accept you, and they have this amazing, extraordinary practice where if someone comes over to you, they can stay at your place, and you're not supposed to ask them any questions about their intentions until 3 days afterwards. Can you believe that? That's amazing hospitality. In Hebrews 13, verses 1 through 3, we read, "Let brotherly love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. Remember those who are in prison, as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you also are in the body." What we see from this text is that hospitality is an act of love. If you want to love, you will show hospitality. But you know, that's not easy, because you know, when you have your house in order and you're inviting a whole bunch of people, there's going to be a mess afterwards, right? Or you have to clean your house to invite some people over. You have to share your place with people. And it says here that you need to love the people around you regardless of whether they're strangers or people close by. And I know we do a lot of ministry, and some people donate a lot of money, but sometimes it's so hard to accept people into your bubble, into your personal space, and invite them into your house. It's a more intimate act. Heroes of faith have accepted strangers, and in reality, they turn out to be angels. Now, it doesn't mean that angels are going to be coming around knocking on your door, but it is possible. We know that happened in the past. Doesn't mean it's going to happen today, but you never know how God works through people and how He would like for you to serve Him. It also says to remember those in prison. That's a great reminder. I haven't visited anyone in prison or jail recently, but it is an act of love. Remember those that are mistreated, because you're part of the same body. So if you're part of the church and someone is hurting, you care for them. You don't leave a person unnoticed. And you might think, what does this have to do with hospitality? Well, hospitality refers to the generous and friendly treatment of guests, visitors, or strangers. And it involves making people feel welcome, comfortable, and cared for, often by providing them with food, shelter, or other forms of assistance. Hospitality can be seen in various contexts. And it's not just about inviting people over to your house. It's a mindset. It's a mentality. It's an approach to people where you hear them, where you show kindness, warmth, generosity to people, where your actions reflect value and respect. This is hospitality. It's by providing a loving environment for the people, no matter where it is. It's your house or your work environment, or you're conversing with a neighbor. It's showing kindness and empathy. It also means that you need to be an approachable person. Are you an approachable person that someone would love to engage in a conversation in and feel welcomed and warm? I truly strive to be more approachable. So we have many examples in the Bible where Abraham and Lot expressed hospitality. But then when Jesus was here on earth, there were people that were actually expressing hospitality as well. You remember that Jesus didn't have a permanent place to stay. So He would travel. And He relied on regular people to provide Him food, shelter, and a place to stay. One of those people was the house of Lazarus, Maria, and Martha. They were siblings. Excuse me. Jesus loved them. It doesn't say why Jesus loved them, but we know that he spent a lot of time at their house. I could only suggest that if you're going to spend a lot of time with people, you're going to make them feel good at home, they're going to be welcome, you're going to develop relationships with them. But guess what? If you invite Jesus, you know who else comes along? His 12 disciples. Now, that's 13 people that you have to invite to your house. That's a small crowd. And you know how big the houses were back in the day? About 500 to 600 square feet. That's smaller than your one-bedroom apartment. So they would bring all these guests and show extreme hospitality. Inviting a small crowd. I mean, I understand inviting Jesus. He has good qualities, right? He's going to care for you, listen. But all of those other fishermen with him, I'm not sure about that crowd. I mean, I'm not even sure if they have the proper table manners, you know? I mean, they are fishermen. Yet we see that they would invite. And this is an example for us. You know, when we want to invite Jesus into our home, into our house, Jesus is going to come with another Christian. He's going to come with another brother and sister. And it's going to be hard to invite Jesus without your fellow brothers and sisters from your congregation. So I invite you to practice this kind of hospitality. It says in Matthew chapter 25, 31 through 40, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another as shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the earth. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and gave you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me." Turns out, hospitality is so important that it goes on your record. You know, it's not like one of your parking tickets that doesn't go on your record. Lack of hospitality goes on your record. God cares about that, right? And in the time of Jesus, you know, some people were not very welcoming of Jesus. We see that he visited the house of Simon the Pharisee, and he was invited, but there was no spirit of hospitality. Jesus wasn't very welcome there because, you know, when we see that during that meal, a sinful woman comes and she cries at his feet, and it says, the Bible says, she washes his feet with her tears and wipes his feet with her hair, and then anoints him with oil. And this Simon the Pharisee, he didn't like that. First of all, he thinks that Jesus didn't know who that was because that's a sinful person. And later on, we also understand from this that Simon's attitude towards this woman wasn't positive. She wasn't welcomed in his house. You know, she wasn't good enough. She didn't belong to his circle of friends. And he wouldn't show hospitality to her. You know what's ironic? The person that didn't want to accept that lady, that sinful person, the person that lacked hospitality for that woman is the same person that lacked hospitality for Jesus Christ himself. Because Jesus, he rebukes Simon and says, "Simon, you didn't give me water to wash my feet." This is a basic thing that you do back then. People are traveling dirty roads and you give them water. This is very basic. He says, you didn't greet me with a kiss. You know, those cultures, Greek cultures, Roman cultures, they would kiss you on the cheek. I was on my trip earlier this year for my work in France, and the other team that met us, they met us with the kiss on the cheek. I was a bit caught off guard, I tell you that. But, you know, maybe what I propose is that at our church, we make some more efforts in showing hospitality and how we greet people, you know. Maybe some of you can practice the Argentinian kiss. And we know our Pastor Vasiliy, Irina has some experience, and Eugene and Lily, you know. So, but at minimum, let's do a little bit of hugging, you know, not enough hugging. Appropriate ones. But this is how we can foster hospitality. It's showing warmth and a sense of welcome to other people. You know, there are also examples when people invited Jesus into their house, they showed hospitality, and they were rewarded. Zacchaeus, he was transformed when he invited Jesus into his house, and he became a believer. Jesus transformed his life, and he says, I'm going to give away half of my wealth. I'm going to serve people. His mind was transformed, and he was starting to care for the needs of the people. When Jesus was resurrected from the dead, he joined a couple of disciples going to Emmaus. When they reached the house from this trip, they were going to go inside, but Jesus didn't ask to be invited. Frankly, Jesus made a sign that he wants to continue on his travel, but they urged him to come in. That was proactive hospitality, where they wanted to show care and love for him. Well, guess what? You know how they were blessed? Turns out that was Jesus himself. They didn't know that. They thought he was a stranger, and turns out by inviting the stranger, they ended up dining with Jesus himself. What a blessing. If they didn't invite him, they would miss out on this wonderful opportunity. Are you missing out on any opportunity in your life to have Jesus come into your house and dine with you? We saw that Abraham showed hospitality to God. People in the time of Jesus showed hospitality to him. Now the question is, will you show hospitality to God and Jesus today? If Jesus were to appear today, how would you welcome him and care for him? But remember, Matthew 25:40 says, truly I say to you, as you did it unto one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. When you accept a stranger, you accept Jesus. When you visit a sick person, you visit Jesus. When you visit someone in jail, you visit Jesus in jail. Hospitality is no longer this idea of a social event where you converse to people. Hospitality now becomes a very big thing with bigger implications. And the fair question to ask, does God express hospitality, and how does he show that to us? Well, in Luke chapter 14, Jesus talks about a parable where a man gave a great banquet one time. And he invited all of these friends, and they said, we don't have time for that. And he said to his servants, go out into the street, invite everyone, lame, sick, poor, people of all kinds, all walks of life. And they were invited into his house. This right there is a parable of how God is inviting us, especially the Gentiles that are outside of his Israelite nation. We were strangers to him. There was no covenant between us and God. Yet he has sent Jesus Christ to die for us, and he is inviting us to be with him in heaven. When Jesus was leaving earth, in John 14, verse 2, he says, in my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again, and I will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. what a straightforward and a simple example of how God and Jesus is showing hospitality to us. He is inviting us to share his heavenly house with us. Doesn't that encourage you to share your earthly shack with other people? It should, because God is doing this and he's showing us an example. So how can hospitality look in our lives? There could be hospitality with neighbors. You know, we live in a culture of individualism. It's a mindset of mind your own business, you know. I've seen a situation where a neighbor's hose was running and it was just like spewing water onto the street. No one cares to come by and say, hey, did you forget to turn off the faucet, or did your hose leak? You know, people's like, that's his business, you know. I'm not going to be part of that situation. That's the mindset that is very prevalent in our society. People live without knowing their neighbors. You know, I've actually met many of my neighbors when we had a car crash on our street. And I thought, wow, it takes an unfortunate event to meet people, and then they're all starting to come out, but I'm glad that I actually met them, you know. In 2003, Joyce Vincent, a lady living in UK in her apartments, she passed away. Her death went unnoticed for 3 years. 3 years. This was in apartments. Now, they figured that out because her automatic payments for the apartment stopped going through. And then authorities showed up and decided to check up on her, you know, and discovered that she actually passed away. She was sitting right there in front of her TV, and the TV was still running for 3 years. The question is, where were the neighbors? Did they care? Did they know who she is? Did they check up on her? Right? This is what our society is turning into. You know, we're glued to these TV screens and to our phones, and we're really busy running around, and we don't have time to socialize with people, to invite them over. I will tell you that later on, you're not even going to have capacity to have people over and socialize. And I'm convinced that the church, having a very strong sense of community and relationship, is going to be the beacon of light and hope for our societies in the future, especially through home groups, as a place where we can invite people to actually build relationships with them and connect. And if you think this is just one example, there's actually a ton of them. In 2014, a man by the name of George Bell, a former corrections officer, you'd think he has a lot of connections. He passed away in New York, and it took 4 months for people nearby to understand that. Don't ask me how they got that sense that he passed away. But the New York Times actually wrote that there's a growing issue of loneliness in big cities. Does God want people to live a lonely life? Does he want them to pass away alone? Christians are called to be there for these strangers, to make friendships and to bring them to Christ, lead them to Christ. You can reach out to your neighbors, offer them help, invite them over, just tell them that you're there for them, you know? If you end up missing one of those evenings, and instead of coming to your small group, and you miss that out just because you want to invite your neighbors over and spend time with them, we would be thrilled if you do that. That would be a great opportunity to establish a relationship and then perhaps invite them to the same home group, right? This is what it's all about. It's an opportunity to share the gospel message. Our family used to do block parties for our neighborhood, and then when COVID hit, that all messed up. But I'm here to make a commitment that next summer we're going to resume that. And I encourage you to make a commitment in your life for the next steps you will take when it comes to hospitality with your neighbors. You can visit your neighbors at Christmas time, sing them carols, give them a small gift. You know, it's about stepping over your laziness because it requires a lot of hard work. It requires stepping over your comfort zone, especially if you're an introvert. And why should we do that? Because there's a bigger purpose. Because this is how we share God's love. It's a starting point. It's an entry to telling them about Jesus, about the gospel, of new relationships. It's not just socializing sometimes, it's actually sacrifice that God values. And then there's hospitality at church. Many people know our church as a very warm and welcoming place, and that's wonderful. We hope that it stays as an outgoing, very simple, family-like atmosphere and environment, and it's because of you. And I want to thank you for that. Obviously, all the praise goes to God because He's put that desire into our hearts to serve people. However, every one of you play a role in whether or not our church shows hospitality to everyone around you or not. You know, there's people that will meet you in the parking lot. Not everyone's going to meet me or Pastor Vasiliy. There are going to be people that run into you in the foyer or in the parking lot. You are going to be the representation of GNC's hospitality, of God's hospitality, of His love and care for other people. God's love should channel through you onto other people. If you think about our church and the areas of hospitality, that could be small groups. You know, our group this season grew to 12 or 14 people, and I'm thinking, my house is not big enough. I mean, the issue is that not everyone can be seated behind the dining table. And as I was preparing this sermon, I realized, what about the 2 living rooms that are just empty, you know? Because we have an average house that's about 2,400 square feet. That's an average size house in the United States. Nothing like they have in Asia or Europe, where you have small apartments of about 600 square feet, and people are still gathering, they're still studying the Bible. I think we got a little spoiled here in the United States, thinking that we don't have big enough places to host our home groups and invite people over. The very early church was very hospitable. In Acts 2:46, it says, "And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts." The early church did that. And perhaps this is an area of your growth. Challenge yourself to host one of small groups at your house. Maybe set yourself a goal to do it once and see how that goes. It's going to be a sacrifice and a true commitment for some people. Other ways you can show hospitality is invite people to our church events. Meet new people at church, come up to them, don't be shy. Foster hospitality through our GNC cafe. See how you can care for your church members, for your brothers and sisters at church. Get to know people and their needs. Romans 12:13. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. I feel like we just need to slow down sometimes and take a very good effort at socializing. You know, in Ethiopia, they have something called the coffee ceremony. When they invite people and they want to care for these people and show hospitality, you know what they do? They start roasting coffee beans. And then they start grounding them and then brewing it. And they could have 3 cups of coffee for several hours. That's amazing. I mean, you have to be very intentional about finding time to connect with your fellow brothers and sisters. This is the way you honor your brothers and sisters in Christ in your GNC family. And if you're going to say, I have a busy schedule, then we should fix that. Because hospitality is not a small thing in the Bible. And if someone has invited you to their house and you visited them, maybe start with a very small step and invite them back over. Hospitality outside of your circle. This is also very important. These are people that are not your neighbors, they're not your coworkers, they're not your friends and family, this is not your church. These are strangers and poor people. Are these people nobody to you, therefore they're not welcome? Jesus came to serve these kind of people, and we should follow His examples. Jesus will come to you through a stranger. Luke 14:12, it says, he also said to the man who had invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Wow. When was the last time you invited a stranger, a homeless person? It sounds radical to us, right? But Jesus is calling us to live out the gospel message, God's love, radically. Refugees are going to fall into the same category, outside of your comfort zone. I'm very thankful that our church is serving refugees. And we have good works ministries such as the food bank, where we make people not only providing food for them and for their needs, we make them feel warm. And that's another place where you can connect to show people hospitality. You can sponsor a family in the time of war. You can make friends with them. You can fulfill their needs. Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said, we must be ready to allow ourselves to be interrupted by God. God will be constantly crossing our paths and canceling our plans by sending us people with claims and petitions. That's God trying to do work in your life. And the question is, will we answer that call? Lastly, we should show hospitality to orphans and foster kids. I know this is not talked much about. We have a ministry here called Tabitha, where we help single moms and orphans overseas. And Mark 9:37 says, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. If you want to receive God and be very radical about His love, I encourage you, I challenge you to start thinking about maybe hosting an orphan for several weeks. There are exchange programs. I urge you to reach out to an organization in our community called Olive Crest. We have a huge need in the state of Washington for people to care for foster kids. You can go through this entire process and have a kid over for short term, which is several weeks, to a long-term placement. You can provide them respite care when they're over at your house just for several days. You know what? If the church is not going to respond to that, you know what will? And who will? There's going to be other families that are nothing that share biblical principles with you. And they will influence those kids, and they will take them into their families, and they're going to have a horrible influence on them. So the question, are we going to take these children in? I'm hoping one day maybe Olive Crest can come out and visit our church with their presentation. My friends, in conclusion, what is your response? What commitments are you going to make today to show radical hospitality? What small steps are you going to take in your life, and what areas of hospitality would you like to improve on? Imagine if you would show hospitality to your neighbors and start showing grace to the people around you. Big things can start happening with a very small thing, such as an act of hospitality. Imagine you have a neighbor that moves into your community. So you go out and reach out to him and say, welcome, but instead of him opening the door, the next day, he actually takes off his doorbell. You're like, wow, that's weird. And he's a very isolated person. He has a big dog, and everyone is intimidated of that dog. All the neighbors are. And imagine one day, you're going to show a love, a small act of kindness by helping him find his dog. And because of that, he's going to start being friends with you, and he's going to come over to your house. But imagine one day, he suddenly gets arrested because he's had a meth lab in his house. And you feel betrayed because you just expressed a lot of hospitality to him, a lot of love, warmth, and welcome. And he's betrayed you by having this criminal activity in his house. And the neighborhood is in uproar. People are mad. And rumors are going around that you were kind of connected to this criminal. Imagine you continued to stand strong in faith and continue to channel God's grace onto him and those people around you. You visit that ex-neighbor in jail, and you continue to love him. Later, you decide to continue spreading God's grace through hospitality, and at some point, you invite several blocks of neighbors to your house to feed them. And obviously, the rumor's still there. Remember that guy, Hank? Wow, what a bad guy. And you take that opportunity to witness the gospel to them and tell them, look, everyone's a sinner. Everyone is in need of Jesus Christ. That criminal and me and you. And you actually tell them that your ex-neighbor repented in jail and he came to Christ. And that touches the hearts of your neighbors, and they also start attending church, and some of them accept Christ. You think that's a crazy story? It's actually real. It's actually real. See what God can do in your life. Just start with a small act of hospitality in the name of Jesus Christ. Let's stand up and pray.